Welcome to the Inclusivity and Diversity in Games panel today at Gauntlet Con. I'm joined today, I'm Rach Shelkey. I'll be your moderator today. I'm joined with Stephanie Bryant, who is best known for the Threadbare RPG and has contributed to many different games. She loves being a Kickstarter stretch goal. And I am also joined by Eddie Webb, who his highlights include Pugmire and Vampire the Masquerade and Futurama Game of Drones mobile game. Thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
So let's start at the one thing I know I see come up a lot in conversations about making the gaming community more inclusive is the myth of it's hard to find diverse voices to contribute to gaming projects. What is your opinion on that concept?
I'll go ahead and start. Honestly, I don't believe it at all. I mean, a lot of times when people say it's to find diverse games, what they're really kind of saying is people that I work with, and it's hard for me to break out from that particular pool of talent. I have had the fortune to work with a lot of really talented, diverse voices over the years. But a lot of times it just takes a matter of talking to people, seeing what their interests are, particularly when the diverse voice is somewhat invisible. Like in my case, I have hearing loss, and so people to realize like, oh, hey, here's someone who can write well about disability, and I've only actually been hired a few times for that specific voice, but that happened when I started talking about it more online, and some people are like, hey, here's someone who can write about disability and write convincingly about disability. So it's really a matter of if you just and try to reach out to people and see what they're saying and seeing what kind of voice they bring to a project, it's not that difficult to find diversity, in my opinion.
Stephanie, what's your position on the myth that it's difficult to find diverse voices to help produce content in the role-playing community and the gaming community in general?
So my take on it is very similar to Eddie. And this actually just came up in a thread on Facebook. Somebody posted on a thread related to this issue, and they said, well, you know, the real problem is that there just aren't that many Black people creating games to begin with. And I just
Michael Ponch would like to talk to you about that.
Yeah, I mean, my reply was, just because you don't know any doesn't mean they're not doing it and they're not out there. I mean, really, it just speaks to that person. And I don't want to use this term pejoratively because we are all ignorant at some point or another, but it speaks to his ignorance that he has not gone out and looked for and found those voices. And let me tell you, it's work. It is work to make your pool broader like that. And I have thoughts on this, and that hopefully will be something that we can talk about in a bit during this panel.
Yeah, I remember on Twitter a while back, someone was passing around a tweet that someone had posted that was, I would buy more products by women in tabletop gaming, but are there any working in tabletop gaming? I can't find them. And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue, I don't want to say issue, part of the contradiction I find is that the more diverse voices make that a selling point. Woman in tabletop gaming, or hey, I'm homosexual in tabletop gaming, whatever. The more they make that a point of their voice and make it public, then you run into the, well, now you're just making it political, yada yada yada. So there's this weird precarious balance, because if you bring someone who's a person of color or whatever and bring them in the voice, if they're just a name on the byline and there's not an obvious immediate connection, a lot of people that is a diverse voice brought into the project. But if you make too much of a hype about it, then you get the opposite. So there's this weird balancing act. Like I've known people, I mentioned it jokingly earlier, but I've known people who played Cyberpunk 2020 for years who had no clue that Mike Pondsmith is African American, and it's like, yes, of course he is. I mean, and it's if you Google him online, it's like it's really obvious. It's a very much a part of what he brings to his design. Because it's just a name on a book, it doesn't quite show up. So that's why I talk a little bit about invisible diversity sometimes is, like you say, people say, oh, I can't find it anywhere. It's like, you're not really looking into the names that are in that design, on that credits page. You're not really trying to figure out if they are bringing something more to the table. Sometimes, a woman can write under a pseudonym or under a neutral sounding name, and it doesn't make them any less about a diverse voice on that project.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's like you, Eddie, I see sort of the dual issue there, which is if you are out and visible as, I am a person of color, or I am a woman, or I am a trans woman, or I'm a non-binary person, or I have a disability. On the one hand, it helps you raise that visibility entirely of, yes, we are here and we are making games. And on the other hand, it paints a big old target on you. And I, as a creator, and more specifically as a publisher with Threadbare, most of the people who contributed to Threadbare in one way or another are not cisgendered heterosexual white men. They are in some way intersectional with a disability, or people of color, or trans, or just gay, or just all, there's a good mix. And one of the things that I have had to be very careful of is not outing people as in their space, or outside of their space, because I don't want one of my creators to be targeted by the harassers and the brigades of terrible people who see a marginalized person creating something and feel the need to go and just be awful. So that's something that I like. And some of those things that you can't, they won't be invisible, but for a lot of people, it's like, hey, if I can be invisible, I would like that. If I can make my transness invisible, that would be great. Or at least, if not invisible, under my control. So, and that's something that I try to be very cognizant of. But yeah, that's one of those things where it's like we've got to raise the visibility, but at the same time, we've got to protect our communities.
Yes, in my professional practice, that's the risk versus reward discussion, which I think applies here directly, which would bring us to the next topic, which is being inclusive, widening your audience instead of contracting it. Again, considering this risk versus reward about how inclusive do you want to portray and how out do people want to be, do you guys find, or do you find that being more explicit about inclusivity brightens your market or widens the market that you reach, or does it cause too much of a risk and contracts the potential of the game?
I think it really depends on how the inclusivity is positioned, but I generally have found that it widens it more than contracts it. There are always going to be people who don't appreciate explicit inclusivity in game design or in content. The people who are going to complain about, those goddamn transgender elves in my D&D game and how dare they and blah, 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 blah. It's not what it was back in my day. And there are always going to be those voices. But count of how many times I go to conventions like Gen Con or Midwinter or whatever, and I'll have people come up to me after panels or at the booth and say thank you because I see myself in your game. We're being listened to. I feel like we have a place. Seeing people overjoyed at people of color being used as the D&D starting template characters. That was huge for a lot of people. Just a little note saying that we see you means a lot. And not only do those people buy, but their enthusiasm, their word of mouth will get more people interested and excited. And I find that people who are excited about a product will bring more people to the table than people who are down on a project will scare them away. Because if someone's excited, you're very rarely going to find someone saying, well, that's not for me. Usually it's like going, oh, well, you see, that's interesting. I'll check it out. Whereas people who are negative about a product, you probably get a lot of people going, oh, well, you don't like it. But the reason you don't like it are actually things that appeal to me. Slight tangent, but one thing that I was talking, a friend of mine, Chuck Wendig, he used to be very involved in the RPG community. Now he's New York best-selling author, but once particularly through Amazon, one of the things he learned is that number of reviews on Amazon matters way more than number of stars. And that's something that I've taken to heart as I've tried to be more aggressively inclusive, I should say, with some of my projects, is that if people are talking about it, if it's generally positive to mixed, more people are paying attention to it, and you're more likely to bring people in. So a certain amount of well-managed controversy can actually be beneficial. But just in general, if people are excited and positive about something, they're going to want to bring their friends into it, and that's just generally going to increase sales.
Yeah, I'm of the belief that like my game isn't for everybody, and it's not going to be for everybody. And there was a while there where I really wanted to broaden its appeal to the mainstream, and then I play tested it with people who really like crunchy combat type games, and I play tested it with people who really like Powered by the Apocalypse games, and I play tested with a lot of different people in different groups. And what I eventually discovered was that the game that some people wanted it to be, and that was usually the people who liked the crunchy combat type stuff, was not the game I wanted to put out there. And I eventually, and I can't remember if somebody specifically, explicitly like said, well, you just don't have to have those customers. But at some point I realized that was the case. And I was like, yeah, my game it's not going to be for everybody, and that is okay. It is okay if somebody, never plays my game, or somebody only ever plays it as a one-off at a convention and they never buy the book. Like, I don't care. Because my goal in making the game isn't necessarily to reach every household in America. My goal in making the game was to make this thing, this piece of art and craft that I am proud of, and other people have enjoyed, and they have a lot of fun with, and capture this feeling in this moment. So, I like inclusivity widens my audience. Yeah, sure, like absolutely. And the haters, and like my inclusivity, so to speak, is also exclusive. It's like, yeah, if you don't like my game, play another game. You don't have to play this game. Like, I don't need you to play this game. I don't want you to play this game if you don't like it. I really don't. Like, if you don't sit down and you're excited and happy and engaged, I don't want you to play my game. My game is about being a toy. You've gotta want to play that you're Buzz chainsaw or whatever. You know, you don't like, you got to want it in order to enjoy it, and that's just, you know, and so if you got an element in your game, like in my game, Threadbare is about it's a post-apocalyptic setting, and everybody is an awakened toy. So you aren't even a person. You're a toy. You're like a broken toy or socks, oddly enough. And so as a result, one of the parts of character creation is very explicitly, you have to put your pronoun on your temp card. Because you're a toy. You probably don't have a gender. You know, you might look like a Barbie doll, but she could be male. Like, there's no reason that a Barbie doll, she doesn't, there's no intrinsic, there are no hormones in a Barbie doll. All right. You know, she's made of plastic. So you can say what you want about her gender or their gender. And one of the freeing things about that, of course, is that I get a lot of they at my table. And part of that is because you can play a collective of creatures. You can play like a box of army guys. But part of it is simply that, you know, some people are like, oh yeah, I don't think this dinosaur has a gender. They don't think that way. Like, that's cool. Okay. You know, so it opens that. It opens that space, and very few people push against it.
Actually, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I've seen similar experiences in my game, Pugmire, where everyone plays dogs, because there's nothing. When looking at a dog, you can't tell immediately if they have clothes on whether they are male, female, or identify just as dog. And so that's something else that kind of comes up a lot, is I'm able to kind of challenge normity, because people look at the pictures in a book and they're like, going, oh, that character's cool. It's like, yeah, she's really awesome. And they kind of have that half second of like, to be female. There's nothing in there that they're coded in a particular way. And so I always, whenever I'm talking about characters or talking about the product, I always assume just female pronoun as a start, just to kind of get people thinking about that. And then in other parts of the book, you know, I have characters that just refer to themselves as dog and use they pronouns. It's at a step removed, like with the toy idea, you know, because it's a step removed, you can kind of dig into these concepts in a way that don't necessarily rub up against day-to-day conflicts. People can explore these things in a way that don't have to also engage with the modern climates or the political environments or their social environments. And you're right, some people aren't going to buy into that concept. You know, there just aren't people are just like, they're going to rail against it. But to kind of bring it back a bit, I've seen more people react to that freedom than react against that idea.
Yeah.
Which is why I feel like you're right. Some of these games are never going to be in every household in America, like you say. But there are a lot fewer of those games that exist than games where you don't. And so people who don't like those concepts can find thousands of games where they don't deal with those concepts, because that's a lot of what we have. So these few games that do actually allow for play in these spaces are meant to be a little more geared towards people who don't have an alternative. They don't have another game to go to. They don't like this one. And so by offering more of those games, we give them more options, whereas the assumption, there are so many games in that space they can go to. They don't need these additional games, our additional games, to necessarily prime their pump if it's not their thing. So I mean, it widens the audience because it gives these people who don't see themselves in the game a place to play in, a place to feel welcome in, whereas the people who are already welcomed in default media, for lack of a better term, have lots of options available to them.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the benefits of inclusive design. How do you feel your projects have benefited from taking a more inclusive design approach? And Stephanie, do you want to take a point on this one?
Sure. So as I said, most of the people who worked on Threadbare have some intersection of And I will say, you know, I kind of misspoke earlier because I included people of color, and I would say that that is the one place where I did not do well in recruiting. I don't, to my knowledge, have anyone who's non-white in the Threadbare, but I could be wrong on that. I know most of these people online, and so my visibility on that is low. But what because Threadbare isn't a game that is specifically about you know, a lot of these things, but those things are sort of in the background. Like, for example, disability. In Threadbare, you are broken. You start out broken. You're a broken toy. You break easily, and you fix yourself. And how you fix yourself usually changes how you what you look like and how you act and things like that. I had more than one person on my in my stretch goals and in my team and everything who specifically looked at it from the perspective of disability diversity and disability language, and both in terms of physical disability as well as mental illness. And the game changed as a result, and I mean changed drastically. I had a lot of mechanics that I took out because having gone out and specifically asked the question, because I had friends who have mental illnesses, very close friends who have played the game, helped play test the game, and never said a word about what could politely be called or impolitely be called an insanity mechanic, where your mental personality quirks and things degrade over to, as you get damaged. Well, that is a really crappy mechanic. And if you have a mental illness, it is stigmatizing and pretty awful. And it's stigmatizing and awful in a way that every Cthulhu game is stigmatizing and awful. And you still play them maybe, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking, yeah, I got to encounter that again. Great. So when I was making the game, I specifically reached out to one of the people who had play tested it, and I said, hey, I know that you struggle with mental illness. I know that you have a mental illness that you have talked publicly about. When you played this game, how did you feel about this very specific mechanic? And God, it was hard to even see that my mechanic could be a problem. But you have to ask those questions, and it is so hard to ask that question. It's so hard to even see you need to ask that question. So, so that is one of the things that coming to the table and saying, hey, friend who has play tested my game, like when I just asked her for general feedback, she was like, no, it's really good. I like these things, blah blah blah. Never once said a thing about it. It wasn't until you reach out and say, what do you think about this particular part? It's okay to be honest. I invite your criticism. I'm a big girl. I can take it. Don't worry. It's a trust fall. It's a trust fall that goes both ways, because I'm trusting her to not crap all over my game, and the trust from her towards me of being able to be vulnerable that way is, I think it's huge. It's bigger than what I'm asking of her. So, So it's, but it's a better game. It is absolutely a better game because of it.
That's an amazing story. Thanks for sharing it. So it's so interesting being, as a designer, and until you make that space to have someone go and look at your project and just not realizing, because we don't have that life experience to know, oh, this is a problem.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that brings up a really good point, is that sometimes as designers, we have to specifically ask, I want your opinion from this perspective. Because I have kind of two short stories. One, I was lucky enough that the person proactively offered it. When I was working on Pugmire, it's very much uses Dungeons and Dragons mechanics. It's intentionally meant to be evocative of classic fantasy gaming, and as part of that, I had different groups of characters identified by the collective noun of race. And Mark Truman, a person of color, came to me and it's like going, I don't know if you thought about this, but here's why this is a problematic term and why it continues to be a problematic term. And I said, okay, you know what, you're bringing up a lot of really good points. Let me do a deeper dive and kind of think this through. Luckily, my wife happens to be an anthropologist, and so I chatted with her about it, and I'm like, okay, we understand that the concept of race applied to humanity is kind of incorrect, but we're talking about animals here. The baggage that comes with it, and so we had a great conversation. And after, I spent like a couple of weeks thinking about this, and ultimately made a switch to species. And I feel like the game's better as a result of that. It also makes things a lot clearer. There's lots of other benefits that came with that. Another more kind of specific example was I worked on a interactive novel. It's called Ratings War. It's a cyberpunky novel, and you're playing a journalist. And the whole point of it was that you're playing in a cyberpunk world where you're not a combat best. You're trying to reveal all this horrible stuff happening in the cyberpunk world. But if it comes to combat, you're gonna lose. And to kind of sell this point early on, you're being chased by a bunch of gangers down in an alleyway. And one of the things we did early on, I was like, I'm going to be super progressive and inclusive, so you can choose your gender or choose to be non-specific at the very start of the game. So basically, your pronouns switch throughout the game. People refer to differently nationalities, so that way the characters you romance will line up with your preferences. And I specifically said, okay, here's the first chapter. I want you guys to play through it. Specifically, I want you to make sure that because this is dynamic text, that the game is, using variables to put in he, she, they. I need to make sure there aren't any kind of weirdness coming up. And initially, I had phrased this in my head, the idea of, is it just like weird constructions popping up? In my head, I was thinking like, let me use this as a plural pronoun, is confusing. But I didn't specify that. What I said was, look at these pronouns, making sure that they make sense. And one of the pieces of feedback I got back was that if you're playing as a woman and you're being chased by these male gangers down an alleyway, that sets up all sorts of problematic connotations. And that was a perspective I just completely did not even think about. But because it was then they came from the perspective of, did you intend this to have a strong sexual element? Because it's a cyberpunk style game. And it's like, because if so, it's they really kind of of, you may want to ramp it a different way. They thought it was, I wanted this and I wasn't doing enough with it. And I was like, no, that's the opposite of what I want. It's just about violence. It has nothing to do with sex. So I change the gender of the main gang leader to female, the one that you primarily are going to get beat up by, and it solved the problem, and it helped me actually free me up with some other down the road knock-on effects that I hadn't anticipated. Because I had that explicit conversation, it was again slightly inadvertent on my part, but because of the way I phrased it, they came to it from the, okay, speaking as a woman, this is why this doesn't work for me. But prior to that, the feedback had been very kind of non-specific. So that's one thing that I have found, is that, yes, in both cases, the games were dramatically improved by the feedback of inclusive voices. And also, as I bring more diverse writers into my work, I find that the projects are generally improving. But a lot of times you do have to kind of be explicit and say, dig into this. I really want to get that feedback. I want you to check me on our privilege, because as we talk about intersexuality, intersexuality, one of the things is that in some places we do have privilege, where in other places we don't. So it's like, even though I'm disabled, I still have a lot of other privilege boxes, and so I'm gonna have some blindness to some topics that I want people to come back and say, no, you're not thinking about this. Here's these other elements. All the people on this panel are white, so we're not going to think about elements that people of color are going to run into. And so bringing those voices on and saying, I want your perspective as a person of color. Tell me what we're doing wrong here. It's hard. Sometimes the conversation can get very angry, but I have never found a situation where that conversation doesn't lead to an improvement of the project. It has always led to a better project, in my opinion.
Thanks for sharing your experiences, Eddie.
Right.
Which brings us to our next topic, which is networking to include more networking to include more diverse voices in your projects. So we touched on earlier, there's this myth that there's no diverse or inclusive voices in tabletop gaming, which of course we've established is not true. But if you were to look for someone to either hire or to be a quality assurance check, basically to go over your work and look for blind spots, where would you start looking for that person?
Do you want to go
ahead? Sure. So one of the things that I have done over the past several years, and I started out doing this sort of not deliberately, and now I'm much more conscious of it, which is that there are a lot of social networks out there that a person can be part of, and Google Plus is the big one for game creators and game designers. So one of the things that I've done in my Google Plus is actively, search out marginalized game creators. So I have an entire circle dedicated to non-male game creators. There's roughly 300 people in it. And that is one of the places I go. I will post to that. I will say, hey guys, I am looking for an illustrator. But I am also in a number of other online resources, which I can read down my list pretty quickly here. I'm part of the Credit Bureau. It's an email list. It's all non-male people who quote verb games. It's run by Avenel Wing from Double Exposure. Great resource for us to find each other. So it's to find and support each other. And what happens a lot of times is when somebody posts on social media or whatever saying, hey, I'm looking for a person of color or a disabled creator or a person who, has this specific, exists in this specific marginalized space, we will repost it to that group and say, Eddie Webb is looking for women to submit to this project. And then, I don't know, Eddie, if you've noticed this, but we'll then, send in a bunch of submissions. And yeah, not only will we send in submissions, we'll also, a lot of times as a group, somebody will say, is there anybody willing to look over my submission before I send it? I personally have imposter syndrome, and I don't think I'm good enough for Eddie Webb's project. Huge problem among marginalized voices. Yep. And so part of what Credit Bureau does is supports each other and says, no, I validate you, go, do it, do the thing, and makes us brave enough to do that. I'm a member of IGBN, which isn't specifically a place for marginalized creators, but it makes space for us, and it tries to sort of improve the networking overall. Tanya DePass runs I Need Diverse Games, which she has both a blog about it, but also I engage her on Twitter. So Twitter's great for, it's terrible for a lot of things, but it's actually really good if you're trying to engage with people of color. And like most of the creators I know who are on social media, they're on Twitter. Most of the people of color who are game designers. or creators of any kind. You know, the comic book creators I know, the game creators I know, like if Black Twitter is a thing, go find it. You know, like go find it, follow people, pay attention to what they're talking about. Like don't crap on them on Twitter, and be supportive and listen, which is of course a huge thing. We all need to listen better. But yeah, like you know, find Black Twitter. Just even if you just follow and say nothing, that alone will help you. Our Many Games is a kind of a blog, but it's mostly a list that's curated by Emily Care-Boss, mostly indie games created by marginalized people. The Girl Gamer Gathering, which I've never been to, but I'm dying to go someday, which I think is a convention, meat-based convention. And I think it's in Seattle, and their Facebook group, lovely group to hang out in, run by Maria Rodriguez. The RPG Brain Trust, again, this is not a specifically marginalized voice. It's in fact over 90% male. We just realized that like last week. But the moderator is Stephanie McAleah. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it is it's a good networking resource, and Stephanie is good with the ban hammer when people get crummy on it. You know, like if people start spouting, you know, bigotry or whatever, she's like, yeah, we don't need you here. Thanks. Bye. You know, and that's on Facebook. So like all of these are just, you know, it's a little bit here at Twitter, it's a lot here at Google+, it's a little bit here at Facebook. And then there's there are two more resources I want to bring up. One is the Women of Game Design Facebook group, and there are two groups, and people don't know there are two groups. One of them is public. Both groups are run by BJ Hensley. One of them is a public group. You can join no matter who you are, no matter what your gender is. And the other one is a private group, and you can only join if you're female. And I do not know BJ's policy, or if there is a policy on non-binary for that group, but I do know that it's basically the Women of Game Design group. The public one is, here's a directory, here is where you can find us. This is who we are here in this group. And, you know, men who want to hire women in game design can go here and find us and interact and talk with us online for a little bit on this group. God, it sounds like a dating site, but I swear to God, it's not. In fact, do not use it as a dating site or
no.
And then the private group is, you know, a place where we can have sort of the back channel chatter and say, you know, hey, I need support, or hey, I need a little help. Or in my case, you know, I posted there and I said, hey, I need an illustrator. You know, and I was specifically looking for, you know, somebody who was not male for that particular part of the job. So it can be daunting to like I mean, I look at my list. Oh, and the other one, God, and I cannot forget this one. And it's not last because it's least. It is last because it was one that I was like, I need to spend a little extra time talking about this one, and that is Contessa. Contessa started as an online convention, and now it is a real life convention support organization group kind of thing. There's a blog and there's a Facebook group too, although I don't know how many people are active in that. And it was founded by Stacy Delorfino. It's currently being run by, hold on, I have it in my notes, by Emily Danvers. And Contessa is a initiative to get women GMing. So events at Contessa, and it started out that way, and now it's women and queer and non-binary, and so it's a much broader definition of who they're recruiting for GMing. But the idea is, let's get these people behind the GM screen because GMing is inherently a position of authority. And when you are GMing, like you gotta check your imposter syndrome, and you're again raising that visibility. Because if I come to a D&D table, the person I'm looking for the most is the person who's GMing. Like that's the person that clicks in my brain as, hey, that's the person that is, you know, in charge or is running the show or is driving the story in some manner. And we all know there are a number of games where that's just not the case. The GM is just kind of along for the ride, but but there's sort of that, there's an inherent implication there. And by getting women to and other marginalized people to take that on, not only are we raising that visibility, but we're also saying, hey, this table, if you are a little nervous about joining a game because you feel like, hey, I'm the only woman in this crowd, like this table, you know, you won't be. This, you know, or this table, you know that you're going to come into this table and you're not going to become the oh, here's the party victim. I think every person who is you know, on the outside of the group has come into a table and ended up being the party victim. And I think the most common case of that is, oh, I was the only girl at the table, so of course my character was the one who always got raped. Like,
oh God.
Oh yeah, sure, of course. You know, and I think a lot of women have had that experience, you know. Or one of my friends has a hard and fast rule. She said, I don't care if, you know, you decide that my parents are horribly murdered, you know, for the GM, but if you make my character pregnant, I am out of here, like immediately. And I've played in con games where someone was like, all right, you need to roll for pregnancy, because I was like, what
Why?
Like, why? We took 400 points of hit point damage in the last combat collectively. Nobody lost a limb. You didn't make us roll for that. Are you kidding me? So, like, do not, you know. So the idea is basically, like, at the very least, you can be fairly certain that you will be in the hands of somebody who understands that risk and will take care not to make that a thing. You know, there really shouldn't be a party victim to start out. Like that's just bad GMing. You know, so like the GMs don't do that. Like, please, ever. And you usually won't find that as much in certainly in contested games, because everybody there is consciously aware of that as a risk, I guess.
Eddie, do you have any tips for networking to get more inclusive and diverse creators?
Honestly, it's one of the reasons why I asked Stephanie Starks. I knew she was going to nail a lot of what I was going to say.
Like, is there anything that wasn't on that list?
But one thing that I think is worth noting that got glossed over a little bit is Stephanie put a lot of online resources, and I think that needs to be spelled out. For a lot of people, the traditional wisdom has been go to cons, talk to people, and that's where you find other creators. And that's generally true, but a lot of marginalized people are nervous and frankly scared sometimes to make themselves more visible, explicitly safe space like Contessa. So the idea of, oh, I'll just go to a con and round up some people that will work for my games or play on my games, if you're that location, it's not going to necessarily work. Cases, they have more ability to be honest and be forthright, because you can censor people, ban them, kick them out, whatever. So I generally find, yeah, a lot of that works. But the other thing is, because I do have personally have a large of peers, I will also just go to them and say, hey, do you have any people of color working in your project? I want to throw them some more work. Or do you have any more women in your project? I want to bring more women in that project. And because I'm talking peer to peer or creator to creator, I don't have to or gland hand or make guys go seriously. I want these kinds of people on my project. I need these kinds of voices. What can you help me out with? And I find I get a lot more traction that way as well. So being able to just go to someone and honestly say, I'm working on a project. This wasn't my project, somebody else's project, but Onyx Path's working on Scion, which is a game about gods, and the creator, Neil Price, specifically went to people and said, I need people who have these diverse faiths. And these are very specifically the faiths I'm looking for. And so he's went to people he knew until he got some good creators to be able to contribute to that project. So that's another piece of it is those people who are a little more in the normalized space open themselves up as allies, as creators. And a lot of times they end up being hubs of resources to say, oh yeah, no, this person was great to work with. They bring an awesome voice to it, bring them on board. But if you don't have that kind of network, then yeah, going to resources like Stephanie points out, or if you are a marginalized creator and trying to break in, it's another great way to do that. As well as also just make that a part of the pitch. I mean, in reverse to a certain extent is I see a ton of cisgendered white men approaching me for work, whereas someone who's marginalized and says, hey, I bring this cool thing to your project, that's going to stand out in my mind just because it is different from the norm. So turning, as a creator, turning that to your advantage a bit more within the confines we talked about. Sometimes it's scary to do it that way, both emotionally and sometimes even physically. But when possible, talking directly to creators, talking to other creators, saying, hey, if you're looking for a person of color, I'm your man, or I'm your woman, blah, blah. Being able to do that, hey, I'm genderqueer, and I can bring that voice to your project. Encouraging people to sell that more will really help. So brings up, is that a good point? Look online. The only other element I would say is Tumblr. I've also found to be very useful. Just because there's a lot more massively marginalized people who are very happy to talk to you at great length about how you could do better. But sometimes those people bring a slightly angrier tone.
I wanted to add 2 points to that. One is one of the reasons that you won't find as many marginalized people at conventions is A, I hate to say it, sometimes we're scared off by harassment, and B,
yeah.
Conventions are expensive, yo.
Oh, yes.
So we a lot of times can't afford it, and that's just the way it is. So, it's nice when you find conventions that offer scholarships to marginalized voices, like Metatopia does that, and I know IGDN co-sponsors a number of those things. So I look for those as well. And I actually want to talk about the other side of networking among marginalized voices, which is when you come across a project that you aren't interested in, don't think you're a good fit for, or think you're like maybe a good fit, or just quite simply your plate is full, or it could be full, or it's close to full, or whatever. All of those resources would be happy to have you say, hey, here is a job lead, because what often happens is, we joke about God give me the confidence of a mediocre white guy,
Yes.
but it's true, what Eddie said, like pitch as hey, this is created by someone who is not the same as everybody else, but also go ahead and when it's not your gig, forward it or recommend. Oh God, the recommendations are so important.
Yeah.
If Eddie Webb has something come across his plate, he's like, this is not my bag. Like, this is really cool, but it is not my bag. But he then says, this isn't my bag, but have you met so-and-so?
Yep.
And, have you met Quinn Murphy? Have you met, Emily Voss? And let me introduce you so that you guys can talk, because I think this person would be a good fit. And this requires, again, that you be in those in those groups, or you be in that network, to have in your mind already, hey, I know somebody who would be really good at that, or who would really, enjoy working on it the way that I would not enjoy working on it. And then you can make that recommendation, you can make that connection, and then you are giving back, and you are helping to boost that voice. And I want to give a shout out here, which is Josh Jordan does that really, really well. Josh Jordan is a game designer. I think he's in Texas, and he is very good at have you met so and so? Let me get this voice out there, or he himself is good at working with other people who don't look like him, I guess you could say, and boosting their presence as well. So
fantastic. I have one question from the audience. It goes back to something that we talked about earlier. Christo is asking for tips on helping players at a table get other characters' genders correct.
Honestly, I've seen something similar to Stephanie mentioned. Just table flags, tents really help to kind of just say, my pronouns are blah, and put a card in front of you. Also, one thing I've been seeing more at some conventions and in some LARPs particularly are buttons with pronoun names on them. So that way you can see them more clearly. And so that way, if you are underbending in terms of the character you're playing, it's reminder, hey, it's visible reminder, I'm playing a female character, I'm playing a non-binary character. I know Dystopia Rising, the LARP has started doing patches as well, so they can incorporate that, because it's a very post-apocalyptic style game, and so they have patches you can work into your costume, so that way it's a more subtle cue, but still it's a way to kind of people immediately go, right, I'm supposed to refer to you by those pronouns. So I mean, just in the same way that you would try to get people to remember that you're playing an elf, or whatever. I mean, just it's the same kind of whatever source that people are getting the information to realize that you are playing something different than the person sitting in front of me. Incorporate the pronouns into that information structure. It should be a trivial amount of work.
Yeah. So I just came back from a convention where this came up. Not just for character pronouns. They had pronoun ribbons that you could put on your badge, and I was talking with a non-binary friend of mine who's very gender fluid, and they said my pronoun could change this afternoon, so why would I put a ribbon permanently on my badge? And it gets awkward. And at the beginning of the game, typically we would go around and introduce ourselves and our pronoun, and then we would introduce our character and their pronoun, and that is awkward too. And it's awkward in part because I don't usually have to refer to somebody who's at my table in the third person. I have to refer to their character in the third person. So when I ran my game, I didn't ask for people's pronouns, I asked for their character's pronouns, and for the most part, did not refer in the third person to the people at my table, just to their characters. Things that help. When the person playing the character portrays their voice or mannerism in a way that we code as masculine or feminine, or in a way that matches what we think of as that gender, it does help the other players not misgender them. But here's the caveat: that puts the onus on the person playing the character to consistently reinforce that, which is not fair. And honestly, there's no reason why you can't talk like this, look like a Barbie, and be a boy. And that's just something that it really helps if everybody at the table is consistent and insistent on the pronouns. not misgendering your characters. You know, if you've got the tent card and it says, you know, what your pronoun is. And by the way, put that information on both the front of the tent card and the back, because the people sitting next to you can't see the front of your tent card. It's like a minor thing, but I usually, like, the person next to me, I'm like, who are you again? As a player, write it down. I will usually, on an index card, when we go around the table, I will write down the character's name and their pronoun. And I usually also write down the player name, because if I'm GMing, I may have to actually talk to the player, not the character. I try not to do that too much, but it can happen, especially if I got to get somebody's attention or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I'll put that on like an index card, and I'll actually do it like the person who's sitting over here compared to me is here on the index card, and here and here and here and here and here, so that I can go around the table and at a glance I can know who I'm talking to. And you know, self-policing. But here's the thing with misgendering, and this goes for games and in part with real life. Like, if you misgender somebody in game, and usually in real life, the wisdom that I've been given by my numerous trans friends is, do not make a big deal of it. Fix it. Maybe say sorry, and then, you know, switch pronouns, and just like you just gotta try. You gotta try to, like, not keep doing it. It can be really hard, especially if it's somebody you've known for years and they've recently changed their pronoun, and you're like, I'm doing my best, you know, and you just, like, consistently practice, consistently try. It may be the kind of thing where while you're talking to the person, you are thinking, okay, don't call them he, don't call them he, don't call them he, don't call them he. And then, you know, don't call them he. And then, you know, you eventually, like, that becomes just sort of in the background, and you're just like, no, that person is they. I know that person is they now. But it can take a while. It can take a while. I've got friends that I've known years, and I still unintentionally and I still misgender them. You know, and I try not to. For characters, usually you're only meeting them at the table once in a while, so you know that can be tough. You just gotta try. I guess that's like really crappy advice. There's not really a trick. Be better. That's all.
Always try to be better.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining me today, Stephanie and Eddie. The resources we talked about, we'll be collecting those and putting those as part of the YouTube video descriptions, so they'll all be there for you to access. Stephanie, if people are looking for you online, where can they find you?
You can usually find me on Google+, but I also have a blog at mortain.com/blog. And if you are looking for Threadbare, it's threadbarerpg.com, and that's BARE, not BEAR. But yeah, those are probably the places to find me.
And Eddie, where can people find you online?
My personal websites and information you can find at eddyfate, that's EDDYFATE.com. And if they want my professional websites and also the projects like pug.com, PUGSTEADY.com.
Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rich.